begin the 10th virtual talk from Ormskirk and District Family History Society by telling you something that you may or may not have already realised. Whether or not we have met, you and I have already got something in common. We can both be identified not just by our first name, but also by our surname, which can be very useful and in fact is an absolutely essential way to identify somebody in the modern world. As a family history society, ODFHS are looking at surnames as a way to help members to identify other members who might be researching the same names that they are. And that's why we offer our members the option to include those surnames of interest in our members' names directory, which we publish around about once a year. It's quite a quick and easy way to find out whether anybody else who's a member of the society is researching the same names in the same area and at the same time as the people that you're interested in with that same surname. So you may have ancestors in common, and that would be a quick way of trying to work out whether you had a link to another member of our society. The other wonderful thing about surnames is simply that it does of course make an awful lot of sense to base your research around something, and when it comes to family history, the thing that we are usually focusing on to direct our search is a person's surname rather than their first name or even the place where they came from. You can specialise regionally in one name type studies if you want to, but a surname and a place is going to be key to starting off your family history research. Surnames as we know them today are a relatively new concept. A really interesting blog that I found on the English Heritage website makes the comment that around the time of the Norman conquest, sort of 1066, English property owners were actually often only identified by their first name. There was no surname or anything else to differentiate them from another Eric or Alfred or Ethelred or whatever their name was. It was just, you'd have to work it out by virtue of the place where they happened to be. Before that, in the Anglo-Saxon era, names were a lot more flexible, far more fluid. As an example, you might find that Adam Johnson has a son called Thomas Adamson, because he's Thomas, the son of Adam, and then Thomas might have a son called Henry Thomason or Thomson, because he's the son of Thomas. When the Domesday Book was compiled in about 1086, surnames at this point were just starting to crop up. It wasn't a widespread thing, but there were surnames as we would start to recognise them today. And by the time the poll tax was drawn up in 1381, not very popular as you may know from history, the majority of English families were using one specific surname that was attached to one generation of family and then was passed down through successive generations. So you've got your Smiths or Barkers or Aspynwalls, or something that would be distinctive to identify one particular family. Around 30 years ago, back in spring of 1991, our first ever ODFHS magazine was printed. The late Geoffrey Peat, who was then our treasurer, located a reference to a roll of persons who promised to subscribe to the stipend of the priest of the altar of Our Lady at Ormskirk. It's a long-winded way of saying people who were going to contribute to what was basically the priest's salary, the priest's income. And this record was dated the 29th of September 1366. So that would be the feast of St Michael and All Angels, which is also known as Michaelmas. Today I'm going to use that 1366 list as a bit of a starting point, because I want to see from that what we can learn about how people identify themselves before families had necessarily adopted a set surname. And I also want to see whether we can use those descriptors or nicknames to see whether we can learn anything about life in the Ormskirk area 6.5 centuries ago. At this point in time, we are the better part of 200 years before the earliest surviving parish registers, so we definitely can't really use parish registers. We're going to have to try other things. That is today's challenge. There's one thing that we really need to be aware of, and you might already have thought about this yourself. Despite what the computer may have you believe, standardised spellings are an extremely modern idea. We are going back now to the 14th century. If you are a noble person at this time, perhaps you're one of the landowners somewhere around Ormskirk, somewhere like Lathom or Scarisbrick, you may well be speaking French as well as English. If you are in a religious order, perhaps you are one of the monks at Burscough Priory, there's a good chance you will know some, not even rudimentary Latin, probably relatively advanced Latin. But for the everyday person in the street or the field, they may well be able to speak English at this time, but whether they can actually read or write in English is a different matter entirely. People wouldn't necessarily recognise if something was misspelled. It would just have to be interpreted as best people could. To research the first part of this talk, I turned to the Lancashire Archives online catalogue, which you can search from home yourself. I will put a link to that in the description box. You can try it out from home if you want. The next thing I thought about when trying to use the Archives catalogue to look for documents relating to the Ormskirk area is this. Suppose I live in the 13th, 14th, 15th century. How would I try to spell Ormskirk? Here are a few of the spellings that I put in. A bit of information follows also about the date when these spellings seem to have been particularly popular. As we're about to see, spellings and ways of spellings changed over time. Some were enduring, some were just one-offs. So, for our purposes, it looks like Ormskirk seems to be a good way to start the search. If you search the Lancashire Archives online catalogue for 14th century documents relating to Ormskirk and the surrounding area, there is a very good chance that you'll find a description that looks something like this. Two of the 7 men who are mentioned in this property grant have got surnames as we would know them today. 5 others of them, Sir Robert, Lord of Lathom, Robert of Taldford, Adam of Bickerstaffe, Randall of Cartmel, and Robert of Chester, of course, all are identified by their place of residence. Cartmel, which is up near, well, towards Lancaster, is actually quite a distance from Ormskirk, so Randall or his family had travelled far. It would appear that Taldford, or Taldiford, however you care to pronounce it, was a hamlet near Lathom. When you start to break it down into segments of words, when you think that a ford is a crossing place that takes you over a river, perhaps a shallow bit of the river, it does make you wonder, is this Taldford located somewhere perhaps on the River Tord, and through misinterpretation or again just fluid spelling, Tordford becomes Toldford or Tordford? We can't be exactly sure, it's just a guess. See, that might be a clue to the location of Toldford or Tordford. A year later, a case in Scarisbrick comes up where everybody is defined by their address. This is a really interesting one. That most of the places named in this document seem to be relatively local. Deepdale being the exception. There is a Deepdale near Preston, so it's not too far away, but it's not as close to Scarisbrick as the rest of the places. Remember Hugh of Deepdale, we're going to come back to a person with a similar name later on. There's a mention here that Magota is the daughter of Richard of the Crosse of Scarisbrick. So where exactly would the Crosse be? Crosses were often used as waymarkers, guiding you from place to place, the forerunners of our modern signpost, I suppose. The 1840s Ordnance Survey map shows that there are stone crosses, or the remains of crosses, in various places in what is now Scarisbrick. There was one on the junction of Southport Road and Gorsuch Lane, one by the lodge on Southport Road, right on the edge of what is the Scarisbrick Hall estate. There's another on the junction of Southport Road, Pinfold Lane and Smithy Lane. There's a junction of 3 roads there. Another one a little further to the east on the junction of Heatonsbridge Road and Smithy Lane, so we've gone to the other end of Smithy Lane there. There was one on the junction of Moorfield Lane and what was then Broad Causeway, but we would now call Narrow Moss Lane, I think, if my map reading skills have improved. So it would suggest from this that the Crosse is not actually all that helpful a description, because there seem to be at least 5 potential areas where Richard of the Crosse and his daughter Magota may have lived. I notice, however, that Richard's land is said to be in Hurlton, or what we would now call Hurlston Green, and the closest crosses to there, geographically speaking, at least by the 1840s, were the ones at Heatonsbridge and Moorfield Lane. So perhaps he did live on the Burscough side of Scarisbrick. Just from the information that we've got in this property lease, we can actually draw a family tree for Richard of the Crosse, which is quite an amazing thing to be able to do with people that must have been born probably in the late 1200s. Let's move forward in time. It's now the 18th of November, 1378. So we're a little after the time when the list that I mentioned was created from 1366 now. And the reason I picked this date is because I found a summary of a document at the Lancashire Archives which told me that Alice, the widow of Gilbert the Barker of Ormskirk, granted a burgage to her son Adam, and it says that she holds this by the feoffment. Basically it's a transfer of land. Alice has been allowed to hold this land by the feoffment of a William of Wakefield. The witnesses to this document are John the Tailor, Richard Shakelady, Richard the Fletcher, John the King. I don't think he actually was the king, perhaps he just behaved a bit regally, and a Roger Oliver. So we find that there are 9 people named, but only 2 of them have got surnames as we would interpret them in the modern world. The rest are known by an occupation or some other description. A Barker, which is relevant because Alice is the widow of Gilbert the Barker. A Barker is somebody who tans leather by using the bark from oak trees. That's simply where it comes from. We've got Richard the Fletcher, one of the witnesses. A Fletcher is somebody who makes arrows. The other interesting point about this is that the man who has given Alice the right to hold this property in Ormskirk is a William of Wakefield. Well, Wakefield is in Yorkshire, it's nowhere near Ormskirk. So that's really interesting. That's obviously how he is defined. He is William of Wakefield, so he must have come from Yorkshire. That's an interesting point to remember. There is a Yorkshire connection to Ormskirk at this point in time. This is 1378. But for now, once again, this document has provided us with enough information to draw a very basic family tree for Gilbert the Barker and his immediate relations. But one thing that you can pick up from all these old documents and old descriptions from the pre-Tudor period is that there were a lot of ways for people to describe themselves. There was no particular method of doing it. You might be a locational name like we've seen with William of Wakefield, it might be an occupational name like Gilbert the Barker, Richard the Fletcher, but on other occasions we find that people were not defined by a surname, but rather in terms of their relationship to somebody else. So although we haven't actually got a surname, from a genealogical point of view, this can be really, really useful information, especially in an era that predates parish records. One that we've got here from the 17th of September 1348, so this is actually just about the point in history where the Black Death is hitting its peak years. So it was in this September of 1348 that we find a record of Adam, son of Alan of the Green. So Alan is defined by his address there. Adam is granting 1 acre of land in Ormskirk to Beatrice, the daughter of Alan. So that should be his sister really, shouldn't it? If he's the son of Alan and she's the daughter of Alan. But what we have got here is no surnames at all. We have only got relationships. Alan of the Green had at least 2 children, a boy called Adam, a daughter Beatrice, and the land that Adam gives to his sister Beatrice is even more interesting because it isn't defined in the modern way, number 15 Orton Street. It's only defined as being next to the lands owned by a John Sparhawk and Thomas the son of Dandy. So again, Thomas is defined by the fact that he is the son of Dandy. It's also said that this property is on the Regium Stratum. I have googled, I've tried to find out exactly what this means. My best guess is Regium sounds like something to do with the king. It would be the king at this point. So it could be the King's Highway, which may be just equates to the main road going through Ormskirk, which is leading to the market. That is giving a brief description of part of Ormskirk, possibly leading off to Orton. We're learning a bit about the town just by looking into these ways of how people define themselves. From this, I think we can also put together another family tree here for Alan of the Green and his family. All of the references up to this point in the talk all predate that list from 1366 relating to the people that contributed towards the altar at the Ormskirk church, and this was quite a lengthy list. It was printed in full in our first magazine, and it included a huge number of people actually, a list of the inhabitants of Ormskirk, Scarisbrick with Hurlston, Bickerstaffe, Burscough with Martin, so that's probably Martin Mere, Westhead with Lathom, and also Skelmersdale. And it wasn't an exhaustive census type of list, but it was representative of the people who were contributing to the funds for the priest's stipend, the priest's salary. Once again, we are now at this point in history where some people have got surnames as we understand them today. For instance, there's a Rix Robinson of Ormskirk, Richard, Emmet Hopcrone of Scarisbrick, Ad Steele, Adam probably, of Bickerstaffe, Rick Drake, Richard Drake, Burscough, Tom Jackson of Westhead or Lathom, and Malkin Waring of Skelmersdale. So they're just a few examples of the recognisable sorts of names that come up in the list. But others at this point in time were still being defined by their place of origin, their relationship to somebody else, or even just their occupation. So, is that enough to allow us to learn anything about the lives of people as they lived it in the Ormskirk area 650 years ago? So we're going to begin with the main town. At this point in history, Ormskirk had already got its market charter, which sort of begs the question, were there any traders in the town? Were there any people making things? Was there any manufacture? Were there any incomers? Well, we can answer a few questions there. We'll start with the occupational surname. We have a few interesting examples. Henry Spurrier. A spurrier is somebody who makes spurs which are worn on the shoes, the spiky things. Robs de Ledebeter or Ledebeter. He's somebody who works with lead. He's literally a lead beater. Simon Le Cooper. He's making things for other people to store things in. Rix Le Fletcher. He makes arrows. He's a fletcher. I think we met him before, because I think he's probably the Richard the Fletcher who witnessed that document from 1378 where Alice, the widow of Gilbert the Barker, gives some lands to her son Adam. Also mentioned is Alice the Barker. A barker is somebody who tans leather using oak wood. Her husband Gilbert is actually not mentioned on the list at all, so again that would tie in with the theory that she had been widowed definitely by 1378, and this is actually suggesting she's probably widowed as early as 1366. Then we've got another type of name that comes in, the geographicals. We've got Adam de Tildesley. Well, Tildesley is near Lee. It's not too far away from Ormskirk. It's in what is now Greater Manchester. William de Winmarleigh. Winmarleigh is quite a bit north of Ormskirk. It's on the A6 between Preston and Lancaster. he would have a relatively direct route down towards Preston, and then he may have made his way to Ormskirk from there. Thomas de Wakefield, Robs de Wakefield, and Robs de Blythe. Well, Wakefield is in Yorkshire, of course. It's about 70 miles from Ormskirk. How easy it would be to get from one place to another is anybody's guess in 1366, but clearly there was a Yorkshire migration. Again, we've got another example of people from Wakefield moving into Ormskirk there. We've also got a Robert de Blythe. Could be the Blythe in Northumberland, which is between Tynemouth and Ashington, or it could also be the Blythe in Nottinghamshire, which is just off the A1 and is actually only about 20 miles from Wakefield. Maybe these people have all moved together from Yorkshire. There's also a few more curious surnames, and I think they are really worth looking into. I think sometimes they cause more questions than they actually answer. Nevin de Striveling. I was assuming he was some sort of bow maker. I was thinking of string. It turns out that Strivelin is actually the old name for Stirling in Scotland, so possibly we have a man here that has come all the way down from Scotland. We've got Wills Le Spicer. Possibly he is somebody who is selling spices just to flavour food, but he could also be more like an apothecary, somebody who is selling medicinal spices, medicinal herbs, perhaps just medicines in general. They would not be medicines as we know them today. He's a sort of an apothecary come herbalist, I suppose. Rix Challoner. I thought this was something of a religious nature, and then I looked into what Challoner actually means, and there is a school of thought which suggests that it comes from the Old English challoon, which just means blanket. Is Richard Challoner actually a woolen draper? Is he a seller of woolen goods? It makes perfect sense that somebody would be making sheep's wool into saleable goods, into cloth. A wool merchant. There's an even more interesting one. Adam, child's father. Now, why has he got a name like Adam Child's father? I suspect perhaps there might have been quite a few little Adams running around Ormskirk, but I might be totally wrong on this. Perhaps his name tells you more about his personality than you ever supposed you wanted to learn. So just from this handful of names, I think you do get a sense that Ormskirk is a place of industry at this time. It's a place of trade and craftsmen and manufacture. We're getting an idea of what people wore and how they treated illnesses, and maybe even the weapons that were carried. And that's just from exploring one or two surnames. It's actually describing quite a lot of different elements about life in Ormskirk in the 14th century. Now, there were definitely ancestors of the Scarisbrick family in Scarisbrick way back into probably the 13th century, I think, is when there was a Gilbert de Scarisbrick around in the 1200s, I think. But they were not the only family in the area, and no better proof of that can you get than this 1366 list. So once again, if we have a look at the people living in Scarisbrick with Hurlston, we find that there are incomers from other places. We've got Wills de Longton, could be Longton in Preston, or near Preston. Wills de Oldham, is that the place in Greater Manchester, as it now is? Robs de Bromborough, is that Bromborough on the Wirral? That's entirely reasonable. Wills de Greasby, that could be Greasby on the Wirral, or it could simply be Greetby Hill, which is an area of Ormskirk. It may be more local than we realise. Gilbs de Deepdale. We've got another one seems to have a connection to the Deepdale area of Preston, I think. Somebody slightly more northern, we've got Henry de Wyersdale. Wyersdale is on the River Wyre. It's between Garstang and Lancaster, so we're going up the A6 again, really. It's a couple of miles away from Winmarleigh. So again, have we got a migration of people coming from the Lancaster area down south along the A6 towards Ormskirk and beyond? It looks as though there is some sort of evidence for that. Find that this is reflected in the 1366 list too. We've got Roger de Aspynwall. Aspynwall sort of evolved into Asmal. Gilbs de Gosford site. I think that may originally have been Gooseford Syke. There are lots of variants on that spelling. Eventually it sort of shortened itself and it moulded itself and evolved generally to become the much shorter Corsuch. Hugh de Shaw. So that could be Shaw Hall, which is just north of Hurlston. There's a Shaw Hall caravan site in that region now, so that's probably where he's from. And then there's also several Moorcrofts, but they all seem to be related to the Moorcroft area, which was definitely a surname local to the area, and also there is known to have been a Moorcroft in Scarisbrick, so that sort of suggests what area they were living in. But it wasn't all geographical names in Scarisbrick. There were occupational ones too. Scarisbrick may not have had a market as Ormskirk did, but people had jobs to do. We've got Rick Messenger. Is he literally a messenger? John Le Salter. Is he salting bacon or pork in order to preserve it? Ad Del Strenger. Stringer? Is he stringing arrows? He's not a maker of arrows, that's a Fletcher. He's actually doing the stringing, perhaps. Rob's Le Bagger. I think perhaps not somebody who made bags, but perhaps instead could be a misspelling of badger. A badger is a small-scale trader. Not exactly a market stall seller, but a very, very small scale, one person type of business, maybe akin to a peddler or a travelling salesperson. In addition to these interesting occupations, we have also got a couple of very curious names. We have Katrina Filia Nutricus, so that's Katrina or Catherine, the daughter of Nutricus. The thing that first comes to my mind is nutrition, nourishment. Is Katrina's father a sort of healthy eating enthusiast? Is he into eating things that are good for him? It's interesting that she is defined by her relationship to somebody else, and I wonder if that also suggests that her father may still be alive. On the other hand, if there may be another Katrina in the area, another Catherine, and they need to differentiate between the two. So one is Katrina, the daughter of Nutricus, there may be another one out there somewhere. And finally, my particular favourite, John Le Swoon. Why is he called John Le Swoon? Unless I'm missing something and it's just a complete mishearing of another word. Is he prone to fainting? Or is he so very, very good looking that he's causing all the local women to faint over him because of his wonderful good looks? I'd love to know the answer to that. I think in John's particular case, I think perhaps they tell us again more about him than we expect to find out. I came across a document that predated this 1366 list by 5 years, which made it particularly interesting because it turned out that there were a lot of cross references. On what we would now call the 1st of August 1361, which they called the Tuesday after the feast of St. Peter ad Vincula in the 35th year of Edward III's reign, Henry de Scarisbrick granted his manors of Scarisbrick and Hurlston to Henry Lee Walsh, the parson at Acton, and John, son of Henry of Litherland. So John, again, is defined by his parent. So immediately there, we have got two people who are defined by their address, and another one, the parson, is defined by his occupation. But even better, on that summary there is a transcription of the full document, which goes on to name every single person who lived on the land that Henry de Scarisbrick was passing on to Henry Lee Walsh and to John. And once more, those tenants were all identified in different ways. Rather than read them all out, I thought we'd do a bit of text for this next bit. So we're now in a position where we can compare those two lists. We've got our 1361 document and our 1366 list, and some of the people mentioned on that 1361 lease seem to also be on the list from 5 years later. Gilbert Bemcod and Alan his brother, Thomas the son of Adam Beyson. We've got William Blevin, John Marriotson, Richard Quithead, or Hevid, also John Petty, and Bimson is a surname that is still quite common to the West Lancashire area today. You can also pick out a number of the geographical type of surnames or descriptors. Gilbert, the son of Hugh of Deepdale. Is he the son of the Hugh of Deepdale who was mentioned back in 1323, 38 years before? That would sort of suggest if his father was alive around about 40 years before, Gilbert is possibly aged 30 to 50. And maybe if he is around about that age, given that it's the 1360s, perhaps there's a very good chance that his father, Hugh of Deepdale, is no longer alive. We've got Gilbert de Gosford-Syke. An unusual one here, definitely an unusual spelling. John, the son of Adam of Quatton. Henry of the Syke and Alice his wife. We've also got a defined family group. Alice, the wife of Richard, son of Simon le Walsh, and their son John. So we have got a 3-generation family there. Again, we have an opportunity to be able to draw a family tree just using information from an old document. Now, while we are still in Scarisbrick, I draw your attention to this book behind me, Family Names and Family History by David Hay, which actually makes a mention of Scarisbrick in the 14th century, so this is around about the same kind of time, which is interesting. He doesn't actually say where he's found this reference, but he talks about the name Adam Dragon, which conjures up a terrifying neighbour for the inhabitants of the late 14th century Scarisbrick in Lancashire. Now, Adam Dragon definitely did not seem to be on the 1366 list that I found. Even so, there is obviously some evidence to suggest that he existed somewhere. And he goes on in the book to suggest that perhaps Adam got his surname, which is definitely unusual. There are no dragons that I know of in Scarisbrick. Perhaps he or an ancestor played the part of a dragon in a mystery play. Mystery plays often have religious themes, so it could be something like George and the Dragon. Or alternatively, he suggests perhaps he was given the name in jest because he was so meek, so he's the last person that's likely to roar at you as Adam. So it's a bit like the Little John argument in Robin Hood. Little John was supposed to be, I don't know, 7 foot tall. He was called Little John in jest. It's also entirely possible, when you think about it, that some of the people that we have come across on the 1366 list relating to Ormskirk and the area maybe actually just adopted their name based on one small incident that other people witnessed, or maybe even they just had a nickname that reflected their personality, and somehow this name got carried down to the point where nobody was actually sure where the dragon or mouse or whatever it was name originated, but they just knew that the family was known as that name and that was how it stuck. It's always worth bearing in mind that our ancestors may not have necessarily always been totally serious and sensible. They probably also had quite a good sense of humour in their own way. In the centuries gone past, there is no reason they wouldn't have. That may have been reflected in the choice of names and nicknames that they chose to use in day-to-day life. So here we are in Lathom and Westhead. We have now reached the final stop on our tour of 1366 or West Lancashire. The combined population of Lathom and Westhead who contributed towards this altar at Ormskirk Church come to 94 people, plus another 5 names who are tragically illegible. Once again, we do see that they fall into the patterns that are probably now becoming obvious. So we have got some locational names, some things that reflect the geography of Lathom and Westhead. John de Burscough, so he's from down the road, isn't he? Burscough is only down the road from Lathom. Rog de Aspynwall, so he's from Westhead, clearly. John de Aspynwall and Rick de Ledebeter. Well, I think Ellerb is probably an abbreviation for Ellerbeck, or as we would probably call it today, the Eller Brook. Perhaps they just lived close to the brook. We've also got evidence yet again that people are coming in to the Lathom area from counties far away. Rog de Mossbury, it could be Mossborough, which is near Sheffield. There's also an Agnes, de Goldicar, Roger de Goldicar. That may actually be Golcar, which is near Huddersfield. Quite a bit of evidence building up here that there is a migration from Yorkshire to the Ormskirk area, although it's not entirely clear why. There was actually the priory at Burscough at this time, so perhaps they'd actually come on a religious pilgrimage, perhaps they had moved to be employed, or they'd been transferred as monastic brothers and they'd come to live with the community at Burscough Priory. That's another option, because many of these religious houses were interlinked. So that may be a reason why we've got the Yorkshire migration coming in. You may be aware there is a couple of wayside crosses in different parts of Lathom. There's the Hobcross Lane, and there's the Priory Cross too. not far from the ruins of Burscough Priory. We've got Willsdale Crosse, Alicedale Crosse and Ysolde Crosse. Now Ysolde, or Ysolde, is actually a girl's name, and it's a Welsh origin, so we can't be absolutely sure that Willsdale Crosse, Alicedale Crosse and Ysolde Crosse are one family group. It may just be that they are three separate individuals that live near one of the crosses. There are no relationships stated, but it's entirely possible that they are all part of one household. Again, just a couple of occupational names. Hugh Le Salter, he's probably salting meat for preservation. Rob's Le Tailor, so we've got somebody making clothes. And Henry Le Gardener, so maybe he's a market gardener, or maybe he's actually a professional type of gardener if they had those in 1366. In addition to which, we have a couple of very interesting ones. Will Le Reader, not, as you might expect, somebody who is literate necessarily, or maybe who gives readings in church. It turns out that traditionally the Reader surname is supposed to originate with a person whose occupation was thatching houses and roofs, particularly using reeds. So he's a reader because he's working with reeds. Godith Le Cowdery. Godith is a female name, so Godith is a woman. Cowdery is a Norman French name, and apparently it came to Britain after the conquest of 1066. Apparently it can be a locational name. It could be from Coudray in Seine-Maritime, or there's another Cowdery in another part of France. There are records that Henry de la Cowderay was in the Staffordshire Assize Rolls of 1279, so that's a long, long way before this list is being put together in Ormskirk. Cowdery seems to be from a French word meaning hazel copse, small cluster of hazel trees, but more locally, and in the mid-1300s, Henry de Scarisbrick, who was the son of the younger Gilbert de Scarisbrick, apparently there were at least two Gilberts, and Henry actually married Eleanor, the daughter of William de Cowderay, so that would be a really good reason why there is a de Cowderay around Ormskirk at this time, because one of the significant landowning families had married into the Cowderay family. When you start to look at other records, again using the Lancashire Archives catalogue, people were still in Lathom, still using the name Cowdery. About 80 years later, in 1445, when a William Woodward was allowed to take seize in, or in other words, to take possession of, to occupy, live on, in other words, a property in Lathom or Westhead, so the two places are referred to together again, which was transferred to him by John the son of John the Cowderay, and Henry the son of Thomas, who was the son of Henry of Bickerstaffe. That's a spectacular family tree, isn't it? So from this, just this description from 1445, we not only know that Henry and John passed the lands to William Woodward, we also know the names of their fathers, and in Henry's case, the name and likely place of origin of his grandfather too. And this is all happening 100 years before the very first parish registers start to come in, which is a wonderful find. And I think that that gives us plenty of information that we could use to draw a family tree. Why don't we do that? Now I know I have certainly covered an awful lot of material in this video talk. It does feel like there has been an awful lot of information in here. I hope that some of it has made sense. There seems to have been a lot to explore. But what I have sort of picked up on as I've been looking into these various resources is that the 1300s was a period of history when surnames were definitely starting to evolve. That's what the history books generally say, and that is definitely being backed up by local evidence relating to the Ormskirk area that I've been able to find. What I have learnt in looking at these different types of surnames is that some people were definitely being identified locationally, so in terms of their place of residence or maybe their place of origin. We have got, for instance, Nevin de Strivelin of Ormskirk. Today we might call him Nevin Striveling or Nevin Sterling. We've got Gilbs de Gosford Syke. He'd probably be Gilbert Gorsuch today. Other people were just defined by their relationship to another person. We saw that there was Adam, the son of Adam of the Green. He was alive in the 1340s. Now his name could develop into two different ways if we were to modernise it. He could become Adam Allenson, or maybe he could become Adam Green. There's multiple possibilities there, and it's always worth bearing that in mind when you're trying to work out how a surname might have evolved. So even in the days before the earliest surviving parish records, we can definitely start to piece together relationships and sometimes even family groups. We've seen that some people were identified by their occupation. We've got Simon Le Cooper of Ormskirk. He'd be Simon Cooper today. Will the Reader of Lathom or Westhead, he could be William Reader today, or he could be William Thatcher, because this seems to be what a reader did. He thatched roofs with reed. Then we've got Robs de Taylor, so he would simply be Robert Taylor. There'll be plenty of those around. Through looking at the hints and clues that these names offer us, I think that we can also grasp that there were various different kinds of traders working in the Ormskirk area in the 1300s. In Ormskirk itself, we've seen that there were woolen goods, spices, medicinal herbs, spurs for your shoes, arrows, barrels being sold. We've got lead workers, we've got people tanning leather with bark. So we even know the kind of industries that were thriving, or at least existing, in the town of Ormskirk at the time. In Scarisbrick we've got people stringing bows and supervising larders and milling something, flour, corn, whatever it is. There's definitely milling going on, and people dealing in goods that we can't quite describe because their occupation is described in too vague a manner. In Lathom and Westhead we've also got a tailor, you can get clothes, a gardener, and somebody who will put a new thatched roof on your house. It's all very useful, essential things. And what we have also started to realise, I think, I've certainly started to realise from assembling the bits for this talk, is that for some reason we can't quite work out yet, and I'm sure there is more research to be done in this area. In the 1300s or thereabouts, there was clear hints of some sort of migration of people from the West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire areas coming towards West Lancashire, towards Ormskirk and the surrounding villages. What was bringing them here is a different matter, but it's something that is definitely, I think, worth exploring. Hopefully this migration also demonstrates that people most certainly did travel far and wide, even as far back as the 1300s. So even though we haven't necessarily always had surnames to work from, I think that when you start to explore old documents and ancient late medieval resources, there are definitely things you can find in there that will give you quite a lot of insight into how your ancestors lived, if you can trace them back as far as the 14th and 15th centuries. Thank you for listening, and hopefully we'll be back with another video talk at some point in the future.